get some more viewership and traction here. So how'd this week go, Pete?
It's a busy week as always. I had a lot of different work. Karen had a lot of different work. Austin had a lot of different work. Let's just kind of quickly walk through it. In our House Bill 1705 case, the ghost guns, as you all know, that was appealed. We filed a motion for discretionary review to the Court of Appeals in Washington State. So it's still sitting in the state court. And what a motion for discretionary review does is it requests the appellate court or Supreme Court, depending on what the case is, to review something that isn't quite final, but there's some sort of decision or several parties. And in this case, we asked the Court of Appeals to review the decision that Judge Radzimski made in Stevens County to move it to Thurston County from Stevens. That case has 3 Doe plaintiffs, the plaintiffs proceeding under pseudonymity, and ourselves as Silent Majority Foundation. So I'm excited to see where that goes. The state has till, I believe, August. It's got 10 days from Tuesday to respond. And then oral arguments will be held the first week of September, or I guess that second full week of September. So that case is moving forward. As we've talked about, we're not pushing the merits of the case. We're pushing the question of whether or not these decisions should be moved, which we think is going to create, fingers crossed, some really good case law to overcome, as we've talked about, our Johnson v. Inslee case. And there was another case out of the state Supreme Court, Gonzalez v. Inslee, that basically said, when you're suing the governor acting in his official capacity, it needs to go to Thurston County. While we agree with that based on what the statute reads, we do not agree that in cases like 1705, that type of decision should be moved to Thurston County. So again, fingers crossed with 1705, the motion for discretionary review. Hopefully we get that heard by the appellate court and we push it back to Stevens County. Karen's been working on a lot of medical freedom cases. She and I had scheduled to have a hearing in our Turner versus Washington Medical Commission case that was filed in Benton County a couple weeks ago. And that's challenging the Washington Medical Commission's decision to make a COVID-19 position statement. Without getting into the meat of it and too much into the substance, I want to hold that for when we actually have our hearing, because I did show up in court today, expected to have a 30-plus minute hearing on the question of whether or not the COVID-19 position statement is a rule and how it implicates the rights of medical professionals and, persons seeking treatment. The judge, as she was going through the cattle call, as you call it, there were several folks at the 1:30 hearing time. Gets to kind of disposing of the cases that she thinks need to be moved. Her third case she calls is ours, and I was like, oh crap. And at that point, she said, hey, look, I wasn't able to download the documents. We have to file them in paper, and then we file them electronically. And apparently somewhere in the communications, her electronic filing wasn't working. And so she said, come back in a couple weeks. So we're working with the state on rescheduling that hearing. Again, I don't want to get into the substance of that because it's not been played out yet. And while unlikely that the state would ever hear it, I don't really want to tip my hand. So that case was delayed a little bit. Our Peace Health case, we're fighting on behalf about just shy of 50 Peace Health workers who were shelved or placed on leave without pay for almost 2 years. There was a United States Supreme Court case, the Groff versus DeJoy, which had to do with postal work accommodations for Sabbath day work. And there's some really good case law that came out of that. Again, it's from the United States Supreme Court, and it's going to impact that Peace Health case, I believe. And currently, Karen is working on briefing our version of how Groff impacts our clients. And Peace Health has already done so, and it's our chance to respond. And there's, I've taken a peripheral reading, but again, Karen's leading the charge there. They basically are like, oh, well, don't worry. This really isn't a big deal. It's like, oh, wait, you mean the Supreme Court case that actually turns your analysis on its head is no big deal? And of course, that's typical of, these large companies like, oh, it's no, never mind, sweep it under the rug. But we believe it squarely hits on the mark, and it changes the standard for reviewing these accommodations. Basically, there was a case 40 years back that adopted this de minimis burden. So if there was a minimal burden on an employer, the accommodation wasn't required. Well, that's not, according to the Supreme Court in this Groff case, that's not the analysis. It's got to be more than a de minimis burden. And so it really places the burden on the employer to say, yeah, not having unvaccinated healthcare workers was going to impact me, especially when they made their decision after Walensky, the CDC director, and Fauci, we all know who he is, the devil or whatever he works for. We all know who that is. And when they were out there saying that, oh, it's not going to cease transmission, but don't worry, you won't get as sick. And so, again, we can unfold the whole COVID shot narrative, but bottom line is Karen's working on that. We are working as local counsel with a handful of folks out there, getting something filed. In fact, looks like Karen just filed it, working with Richard Bardens and his team on behalf of someone suing Meta, working with a guy named Chris Dunn out of Florida, suing Jay Inslee, and we'll probably open up that pleading, and I think that pleading could have a podcast of its own because it talks about the nature of Bill Gates and Jay Inslee's relationship. Not that we're alleging there's a physical one, but just the shot mandate. And so, yeah, we're doing some really cool stuff here in state, and then we're also doing stuff with these out-of-state attorneys. Our friend Mike Yoder's got some cases that we're working on, and then, so busy week as always, and plenty more to come. I know I've rambled for about 10 minutes, and people are probably sick of hearing that, so I'll just...
No, you're okay. This is what it's all about. It's updating our followers and their contributors about what's actually going on here, who's fighting in the background, especially since this kind of stuff isn't in the news. People aren't being told how often our government's actually getting sued, and things are not what they say they are. So if you were to put a number on how many lawsuits we currently have, and then how many we got in the funnel, what do you think where we're at?
I think actively we have between what we're local counsel on, meaning we just kind of help sign off and help file stuff, but also give advice on how the local courts work, as well as show up for hearings as necessary. And then actual cases where we're taking lead, probably 12 to 14. Things I didn't talk about. We've had folks in Florida and California reach out for assistance to be, I happen to be licensed to both of those states in addition to Washington. And, as much as many of us think that Freedom Florida exists, there's still issues out there. Got an issue with the firefighter that's not COVID vax related. It's actually, he had some PTSD from having served in our military and then seeing lots of other people die in a civilian role, and he got put on the shelf for that. There's some other cases with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission coming out of Florida. There's an opportunity to work on behalf of children in California who have asserted medical accommodations from the COVID-19 shot, and their doctors even provided, provider's note, and the educational institutions were denying those. And so I say that because, while we're Washington centric, we're getting out there, and folks in other states, again, even free states like Florida, are still seeking our assistance. And we've got some killer attorneys, some kick butt attorneys that are in other states that are like, hey, why don't you hook up with us and let's go to the mat. And it's fun, man. It's, I'll say this, any attorneys out there listening, it feels very lonely, or anyone fighting the system, it feels very lonely, but there's a multiplier out there. And, we get to be kind of the hub right now. And that's exciting because we can see like, oh, here's the reach here. Here's the reach there. Here's people are fighting. And I want that message to be kind of the preeminent message. People are fighting everywhere.
Right. So, that's kind of the theme today is there's a fight going on, right? There's a fight, whether it's being seen in the mainstream media or not, the regular people, the silent majority, are feeling this fight. So one of the topics that I wanted to bring up today, and I don't really want to dive into it because I don't think either of us are ready, especially me, to really get into the meat of it. But we really are seeing an attack on the Constitution, about how the Constitution should be interpreted, whether it should be interpreted, who is allowed to interpret it. We've got, I mean, we've even seen law professors from Harvard, from I think Stanford was another one in there, that are saying, you know what, the Supreme Court, it's not what it's cracked up to be. We've been trying to pack it for years because we want to control it. It's time for the Biden administration to just say, you know what, this is how we interpret the Constitution, not the way these so-called MAGA Supreme Court justices are interpreting it. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, let's start from the false premise. Justice Thomas has been on the court well before Donald Trump was president. So, you know, and he happens to be one of the more conservative, you know, Clarence Thomas is like the conservative bedrock of that court. Now, there's no question that Gorsuch and, oh man, I'm drawing a blank. Gorsuch and
Amy Coney Barrett
and Barrett, and then
Kavanaugh,
and Justice Kavanaugh don't support that bedrock. And every once in a while, they'll slide in a real deep conservative stance, but it's not, in my opinion, it's not a conservative stance, especially from them. I think that's what I think they all believe the Constitution provides that. I mean, especially Thomas, he's an originalist, you know. And obviously Samuel Alito's been on the court for quite a bit of time. So again, they're not MAGA justices. So the fact that you're alluding to an article, and just in looking at it, I see about 9, and it's 2 pages, and I'm on page 1. But just looking at it, just from an optics perspective, the term MAGA justices appears like 9 times on the first page and several on the next page. And so again, it's so errant that, you know, we're not intending this to be political, but we're going to attack MAGA justices, and that's a totally wrong statement. You know, just say conservative justices. I mean, we can start from how far askew this article is just by looking at that.
right?
But no, I mean, the Constitution has always been under the attack from the liberal side of the country, and you know, you look at some of the things that Justice Sotomayor says. And it's just like, dude, where is reality for you? What version of the Constitution are you reading or interpreting? And, you know, to your point, fortunately, stuff like this, you know, doesn't get huge airtime, but it's out there. And to what you've mentioned, Yale, Harvard, another Yale.
Columbia there.
Yeah, Northwestern, Stanford, you know, I mean, again, these are all big time universities, Georgetown. The reality is we know that they're indoctrination camps.
Right.
You know, I mean, let's call them out for what they are. And it's because people like Mark Tushnet, who wrote this article about MAGA justices, and Aaron Belkin, you know, all they want to do is indoctrinate from the left. The claim that the president of the United States and his administration can just ignore stuff from the United States Supreme Court is absolute BS. That's not how this country works. There's a whole process of checks and balances. I mean, we've all learned this from the crappy cartoons, at least, you know, my day and age, the crappy cartoons, you know.
Well, compared to the cartoons today, I you know, they're probably like works of art at this point. We could probably consider them.
Yeah, they're Picassos, right? You know, because kids have yeah. Anyway, but, you know, you look at those cartoons, and we learned what a bill on Capitol Hill was, and we learned about checks and balances and what each branch had and how they're supposed to work somewhat collaboratively, but not collectively, but independently, right?
Right.
And to claim that the administration can just ignore MAGA justice rulings, it's absolute garbage. I mean, go ahead.
And I think that, you know, just going through this article, it's a very, for the most part, poorly written. Is a bunch of just talking points to your point about MAGA being just thrown out there as often as it possibly can be, which I don't like saying MAGA because if you just say "Make America Great Again," just say that.
Yeah.
I mean, that. Why is that such a pejorative at this point? I mean, "Make America Great Again." What is bad about that in any way? Why couldn't we all agree on that? But my point with coming back to that is they're talking about the overturning of the Supreme Court of the Roe v. Wade, right? They're talking about abortion and how they should just be able to say what it is and make it constitutionally protected, and that is what it is, right? When that actual decision wasn't to overturn anything that the Constitution didn't already say, right? It didn't change the Constitution in any way. They actually were supporting what the Constitution originally said, was that this is actually a decision for the people that needs to be ruled from the state level. If not the state level, then Congress has to come up with a law, correct? Am I interpreting that correctly?
And it had to do with rights to privacy, not a right to an abortion. You know, it wasn't that it granted something whole cloth. And so, you know, it's interesting. There are a lot of bad cases, you know, slaughterhouse cases from the 1800s. There are a couple of other ones that really had to do with basically African American status in this country from 150 years ago that we would never go back to. That somebody who looks different, and I don't know that. I mean, that body of case law, it's gone, right? We've I don't want to say we've erased it from our history because we've learned from it, but you know, it's been overturned.
Right.
And, you know, if it's so interesting that guys like Tushnet just pick an issue that they hang on to. And to your point, they talk about abortion. You know, they even mention the Dred Scott case, which was another one of those, you know, African-American positions in history. And so it's odd that they cherry pick how they view certain cases that have been eviscerated. And, you know, their claim is basically the presidential powers of like, oh, well, you can just overlook them, you know.
Well, I found it ironic that they claim, well, in Lincoln's time, right, he just overruled and took the executive power. They just kind of glaze over the fact that that action actually is what launched the Civil War. So is their position that let's just go ahead and go into another civil war over this? I mean, that's kind of where I'm seeing that leaning in this kind of article with their back to their pejorative about the whole half side of the country, or whatever percentage it's split up into. They're totally just saying that half the country, we're just going to totally ignore any of their feelings about these topics.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting. You know, again, we assume that these are very intelligent people because of their positions. And I'll stop making that assumption one day. But
I've had my run-ins with plenty of professors. I've beyond that point at this point. So,
and I think I am too, but I always try to give some deference, you know, like, hey, it used to be a very highly accredited institution. Now, you know, it's just family money. Anyway, yeah, to your point, the fundamental question that you want to ask is, okay, what about the repercussions? You're pissed off because of 2 or 3 Supreme Court decisions in our lifetime. You've ignored the way that Roe was handled and how it widely changed what the Constitution said, and it's been grossly interpreted over the past 50 years, or grossly misinterpreted. And so it's interesting that there's no viable repercussion in their writing, aside from just it'll be okay. This is what American life should be.
Yeah, we should just let the Biden administration do what they want.
Yeah,
they're smarter than the rest of us.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean,
well, I think they do give us an out, right? We can go to the ballot box and vote, and if we don't like what Biden does and his administration, we just go vote and change that, right?
Sure, you know, because there's so many errant
because we can
pieces.
We can trust the electoral process right now,
right?
It's totally open and free, and we're able to audit that in any kind of form or fashion. But this also brings us into another topic. You brought this article to me earlier this week, and I thought it was pointed and something we should talk about too. What's going on What's the Supreme Court in California doing?
Yeah. So earlier, I guess a week and a half ago now, there was a labor issue in California, and California's interesting. I mean, for a lot of reasons, but on this specific issue, it's got what's called a private attorney general statute. So that means that Silent Majority Foundation could operate, or Serrano Law Firm, if I had it, could operate and sue the state on behalf of individuals and obtain damages as though we were the attorney general. Fundamentally, you're enforcing the law on behalf of these individuals. And it's actually pretty cool, because what it does is it incentivizes people to go out and seek so-called justice and justice, right? Like, I mean, there's a Tushnet Belkin version of justice and what we see as justice, right? But
Right.
bottom line is California allows, through this private attorney general statute, private individuals to sue the state on behalf of others for infringement of their rights and to obtain damages and attorney's fees. It's pretty cool, because imagine our caseload if we could sue the state, like when we sued Inslee, or the several times that we're still suing the state right now. If we had damages that we were collecting for all the people we were, like the Washington Medical Commission, right? Ryan Cole, and the potential defamation he's facing, the millions of dollars that have gone out of his account. Renata Moon, Washington State University, while we haven't committed to suing them yet, the millions of dollars. Now, there are some damages, but it's a whole different process of how the private attorney general things. Again, it just incentivizes attorneys to go after the state. And so the California Supreme Court disagreed with how these labor issues were decided at the U.S. Supreme Court. And then they come back and California overrules the U.S. Supreme Court, which was a 7-1 decision, an 8-1 decision, and California was a 7-0 decision, unanimous, that the Supreme Court was wrong. And Justice Liu, one of the California justices, says the highest court of each state remains the final arbiter of what is state law. Now, while I'd say in some respect we agree with that, there's a process, and that process allows individuals to appeal from the highest courts of the states to the United States Supreme Court. It's called a petition for certiorari, a writ of review, a request of review. We're actually looking at a petition of petition for certiorari in a petition for cert, we'll say, in the Hanford case, because we're taking it from another federal court, the highest level beneath the U.S. Supreme Court. And in this case, someone appealed a California Supreme Court to the U.S. Supreme Court and said this wasn't wrongly decided. Obviously, it impacted this decision, and California says, no, we're keeping our law how we are. But to your point, it's this typical approach of, these guys probably somewhere in their decision said that we won't listen to the MAGA justices, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they probably had Tushnet and Belkin on as amicus briefs, meaning they're friends of the position. And so it's interesting that, picking and choosing, well, this is the law that I'm going to live by. This is the law I abide by. And here, not only do we have it in these high-level professors, but we're seeing it pervasively in the California Supreme Court. It's going to make for a true, to your point, like it's almost like the Civil War could be brewing.
What do you this is purely speculative, or, kind of a hypothetical or whatever, off the record kind of question and answer, right? What do you think is driving that attitude currently in the United States? Why do you think we're seeing this polarization in these groups? Why do you think we're seeing this disregard for the rule of law, for the Constitution, for tradition, and the patriotic idea that we've had for the last 200 years? It seems like over the last 10 years, it's just deteriorated and it's accelerating. What do you think may be driving that kind of feeling in the United States right now?
Yeah, I mean, without being oversimplified, it's evil. I mean, And you and I have had this conversation. Like, it doesn't resonate with me, right? Like, it doesn't resonate with me when we hear about people who, I mean, just let's take the simple concept when it comes to child trafficking, calling them, what is it, MAPS,
Yeah.
minor attracted persons.
Right.
Hell no, dude, they're pedophiles.
Yeah.
Like, to make it, right is right and wrong is wrong. Now, I understand there's gray areas and there are things that this U.S. Supreme Court's decided I don't agree with. Personally, I don't agree with, but I respect the rule of law enough that I think there's always a solution. These people are selfish, petulant children who just want it their way, and they're probably somehow caught up in some evil. And it's a hell of a lot easier to just destroy what's right than to stand for, like, oh, maybe I got to change my behavior. And I don't know any of these professors or the Supreme Court people, but it's concerning when they just say, oh, well, we don't agree with this, and so it's our way. It's the old adage of take my ball and go home. And the only thing I can say is it's fundamentally there's some evil working behind it. And what it is, I don't know, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. And like you said, we've had this discussion, and probably from every different angle that we possibly could. And I definitely of the opinion that it's evil, but I think that it's taking the form of an ideology that we've all seen and heard before, whether you want to call it communism or socialism or Marxism. You know, it's an ideology that we don't have individual responsibility, that there's some greater power that isn't God that should ultimately decide our future and our destiny, right? And I mean, that's really boiling down what Marxism, socialism is, but it ultimately is taking that personal responsibility off of anybody's shoulders and put it out in the ether to be, oh, well, somebody else is responsible for this, not me. I can do whatever I want. And I think you're absolutely right. There's that, I don't want to fix this, or I don't want to have to fix myself. So let's just get rid of that rule that I don't like, or let's make this rule overarching that I can do whatever I want.
Well, and you know, it's clear that to some of these folks that government is God, but it's only their version of government. You know, you juxtapose a MAGA justice versus the Biden administration. And I can't believe there's, quite frankly, I'm probably really going to oversell this, but I can't believe there's anyone that thinks this administration is anywhere near competent. You know, it's absolutely beyond me. And to think that popular constitutionalism is what's represented by the Biden administration, it's an absolute false flag.
Can you that term popped out to me too. In your words, can you define what popular constitutionalism is?
Well, it seems to be fundamentally take the Constitution and allow pop culture to, you know, we talk about the distinction between folks who see the Constitution as a living, breathing document, and that's typically folks on the left, or people with left-leaning social tendencies. And then you talk to the Constitution as originalists, those like Scalia and Thomas and Alito, who looked at the document and looked at what the founders wrote and the context and what did they mean, not what did they mean and how does it apply today. And I think that's your popular constitutionalism, meaning 52% of the country allegedly voted for Biden or whatever the number was. Allegedly, I'm going to say that again, and that they should have a sway and a say in the interpretation of the Constitution and what's good for the people, written by this select group of, I don't know, it's like 24 people, somehow is better than the folks on the Supreme Court.
Right. Well, you mentioned 52%, right? That in a democracy is what all it takes. 51% is all it takes to rule over the other 49, 48, whatever percentage on the opposite side is. It seems like so many people are pounding that democracy. I mean, in this article, democracy. We got to defend our democracy. it really is lost, I think, on the layman or the average person that that's not, in fact, how we are ruled. And in fact, the founders specifically set us up so that we would not be a democracy.
Yep.
So I think that's an important thing to realize and to think about is that when we are electing officials, we're electing them to represent us, them or for their ability to understand what it is that we want, but also we're putting people in power that are going to think about the minority in that decision as well. They're going to understand there's going to be maybe a majority that wants something, but is the greater harm going to be to the minority if we make this decision based on what the majority says? It's such an interesting balance that we've found in our country and in our constitutional republic, and that we've been able to hold on to and manage to cling to, but is they keep on saying our democracy is at risk. No, our democracy is not at risk. We're at risk of becoming a democracy and letting democracy rule and be tyrannical over us.
Well, and I think their democracy, their desired democracy, to your point, is at risk, right? And so they're bearing a false flag, charging up the hill. It's like this is their Iwo Jima, right? Like that's one of the most classic photos and paintings, the guys with the flag up there, right? And that's what these guys are trying to do, is trying to shelf that picture and say, this is the picture we need for the salvation of the United States of America. We need a democracy and popular constitutionalism. We will let popular and public opinion sway what the law is. And we certainly do that, but that's through United States Congress, to your point, the House, the Senate, your local elected officials. They get elected to make decisions based on what the population around them either votes them in or out, right?
Right.
But that's a much smaller microcosm. Here, they're arguing for something much larger than that.
Well, and that's the beauty of the checks and balances, right? It's the fact that it is so difficult to get a majority decision in the House or the Senate, and that's what has saved us in a lot of ways from mob rule overtaking us, right? Because it does take a while, and does take a process for something to become a law. And what these people are clamoring for is to just bypass those checks and balances completely, and let somebody just make an executive decision and not only just somebody. And they don't say Joseph Biden here; they say the Biden administration. These faceless, nameless, who is it that's making those decisions for us? Not an elected official, some bureaucrat somewhere that nobody knows, that sits in a hidey hole in Washington D.C. That's who they want to make these decisions for us?
Well, they probably have a direct access, right? I mean, that's the distinction, right? When your buddy's on the inside, life's good. Now, I assure you, Biden loses in. I'm not going to assure that he will lose, but I will assure you that if Biden loses in 24, that presidential, if he loses next year, this article's not rewritten by these guys. Right. It'll be how to destroy the MAGA justices, or how do we overtake whatever the new White House is.
Yeah.
Unless it's friendly.
Yeah. How do we impeach whoever it is in the White House?
Yeah. Which,
what boogeyman can we claim that they are or did or want to do, so that we can impeach them and take them out or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And it's, I'll be honest. I watch the news a little more than I used to, just because it's on at the gym and I got to do more cardio. The fact that we're looking at another impeachment of a second consecutive president is highly disappointing.
Right.
It really is. Look, he's not my guy. I never wanted him there. I had hoped that he would never get there, and that we would have had some decision from a court saying that there was a corrupt election. That's not happened. But the fact that we're going to consistently be in this impeachment cycle, and I think no matter who the next president, we'll see the same thing continue. And it's like, we can no longer work out our problems neighbor to neighbor. It is literally everybody is taking their ball and going home and then suing for the loss of the use of the ball.
Right.
And to me, it's really disheartening that we see that that's where our political spectrum's kind of being outlined. So I'm hoping that we can make some changes and not have to resort to impeachment, because it should be the final straw. It shouldn't be the place that let's build towards impeachment. And that's consistently what we're seeing. Again, I mean, I know folks are going to hear this and be like, oh, I would have thought Serrano would have loved that they're impeaching him. Like, the evidence is there. He deserves to be impeached. That's fine. But again, it's that it's almost the natural response.
Yeah.
And
The
it shouldn't be.
opposition, right?
It really shouldn't be. It should be like, I mean, look, again, Hunter Biden, the tax stuff and all that stuff. I have no issues pursuing that. And I have no issues putting out subpoenas and getting them to him and whoever else, whether it's even the president, get them to testify before Congress, get them to testify.
Right.
But again, it's sad to see our country in this MAGA versus leftist world, and we're letting a minority of people drive the conversation.
Right.
And that's where we have to get back to looking at independent thinkers.
Definitely. Well, and I think a lot of words in there that are kind of buzzwords you threw out there. The minority. I think there's a minority on either side right now. They're really doing much of the fighting, much of the talking, much of the we picked our name specifically to really let everyone know who it is that we are representing. It's the silent majority, and there's different interpretations of who that is and who that can be. But I think you and I agree that it really transcends left or right, and the rights that we're fighting for are the rights for everybody, that everybody enjoys. Whether you currently have a different opinion about what those rights are, who has those rights, there will come a time where what we're fighting for is your personal rights. And we talk. You talk a lot about institutional, issue. To put subpoenas. The DOJ's got to go after the Hunter Biden things. There's no confidence in those institutions anymore. And we even see our supporters or people just commenting on our work, saying, "Oh, well, the judges are all corrupt. Why are you doing this? We're just spending more money. We're just spinning your wheels. You're costing the taxpayers money." What do you? I know we don't necessarily engage with those people because it doesn't do us much good. But in your mind or in your behind the scenes, what are you thinking when someone says something like that?
Yeah, I mean, so let's look at the claim that we are costing the taxpayers dollars. It's absolutely true. The Attorney General either has outside counsel they're paying a handsome price to, or their own staff. But would you rather have them fighting our offensive approaches or just pushing us further down in the trash, right? I mean, it's like your option is you can punch the bully back, or the bully can push your face down to the suffocating mud. And that's where the AG would be, where Attorney General Ferguson would be, if it weren't for groups like ours standing against him.
Right.
I mean, they have pushed between the Attorney General and the state legislature. They have pushed so far beyond the realm of normalcy and decency that, to me, it would be fully no holds barred. And thank goodness there are groups, not just us, but other organizations standing up, because at a minimum, it at least deflects some of the resources.
Right.
It's not a full-on offensive against the citizens of Washington.
Right.
It's an offensive with some defensive countermeasures, because we're at least slinging arrows at him. And it might be, shooting pellets or whatever, as opposed to the grenade launcher. But you know what? It's still, I mean, every time we talk about this, most cases have 2 to 4, maybe even 6 attorneys and 6 staff. Like, sure, that's a drop in the bucket of a 1,200 head count agency, but you know what? That's still 10 to 12 to 20 people that are getting pulled off of taking your rights and having to fight to defend the existing taking. Right. So I think, when you look at that, like, at least we're trying to hold them at bay and gain some ground.
Well, and they've got a budget, right? That budget's not going to change whether we fight them or not. They're going to spend that money one way or another. Better that they're spending it against us fighting them, taking our rights more, right?
Absolutely, because otherwise they'd be suing on gas stove issues, and our propane would be gone. Janesley's happy to have our gas taxes being some of the highest, the gas per gallon being the highest per nation.
insane.
But that's corporate greed. So yeah, I mean, that to me, there's a huge value in just the fact that we're fighting, and the other thing is in that fight. Again, I want people to get excited that there is someone standing for your rights. I've said this tongue in cheek, but Ferguson's running for governor. Let the next, if a Republican were to win, that person could literally slash the staff and take a nap for 365 days a year for 4 years, and our rights would be further intact than they will be when Bob Ferguson leaves.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is no question in my mind about that.
Absolutely.
So that's what I would say to those folks. And corruption, part of our goal is to expose that corruption. We do our Public Records Act requests. We utilize discovery. We don't always express why and how or even everything we have, but as we build the record, part of the record is exposing what's being done to us.
Right.
And so, again, the investment in our organization is that, one, you get those offensive tactics, and two, there's information that wouldn't exist in the public sphere but for our work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, kind of taking this discussion a little bit further and off topic a little bit. I watch a lot of podcasts that are nationally focused on news, pop culture, whatever. And it's kind of a resounding theme that, oh, yeah, Washington has these crazy laws, but nobody's doing anything up in Washington. I've even heard them say, well, they deserve it up in Washington because they're not fighting it, right? Washington has these crazy laws and no one's doing anything about it, and they're just going to go off the rails. We know we're fighting. We know we're out here. It's just, I think that it's up to our supporters as well to get the message out there, share what work we're doing. And many hands make light work, right?
Absolutely. To your point, if we get people sharing that, hey, someone's fighting in Washington, I've always had this hope. You get a tiniest crack in the dam, and eventually the flood happens, right? And I think as we continually wedge ourselves in there, we're going to see the cracks that turn into larger cracks, and hopefully then not only does it flood Washington with that hope, that excitement, but it floods the country because, to your point, as we look at Freedom, Florida, people look at Washington far left. If we can have some success here, why can't we have success in all other 49 states?
Right.
And so that's where I see us as kind of the torchbearer of fighting for these rights.
Absolutely. Well, it's past 5 o'clock. I know you got things to do. We got family to get back to. So any parting words for our listeners today?
Just, the standard. Keep praying for us. We need your support. We need those prayers. I will tell you this, as I was preparing for the hearing that was scheduled for today, I had a good grasp of how I wanted to approach it. But over the past, especially of the past 48, 72 hours, I've been praying a lot. And as I've prayed more and more, the way to approach the case just kind of got more and more embedded in my mind. And obviously that's personal to me because I'm the one that's in court that's fighting that, and I need to have those words. But the point is, the prayers that we offer collectively on our behalf, or our supporters offer on our behalf, do strengthen and support us. I've talked with Karen and Austin, Katie and Ryan, I'm talking with you, talking with Peach, talking with other folks. There are days where we just don't want to continue, and we do. And there are days where the craziest thing pops into mind, or we get a phone call and some support, like that's inspired. So pray and act, and I'm going to throw it out there. When your action can amount to donations, we need your donations. We've been blessed that another attorney's reached out to us in Central Washington. I've had an interview with him. I'm going to end up meeting with him sometime soon. And I think this is someone who really walks the walk and talks the talk. Be a strong addition. And we're being blessed with more and more people coming to find us. Right. And I think that is God at work. But we need the budget, to fight the $400 million monster of the Attorney General's office.
Absolutely.
I've said this as a goal, and I want to say it again. $1 million a year is the bottom of what our budget should be. We're not there.
Yeah.
We'll be lucky to get halfway there, and we're blessed for that. I'm extremely grateful for the support. But what I see we could do with that $1 million budget could really open up the doors to some stronger success.
Absolutely. And you want to tell everybody where we're going to be tomorrow?
Yeah, we're going to be, is it called Freedom Fest?
It's Freedom something.
I believe that's what it's called. We're going to be up in Redmond. I've got the email somewhere. I'm pretty sure it's called Freedom Fest. And I was actually going to put you on the spot to shout it out.
Plug it,
but
I got you first.
But yeah, you got me. I
think I can find it here real quick.
I'll search Redmond.
It's in our calendar too. I just think.
Oh, is it? Well, if it's in our
Summer Freedom Fest.
There we go. Summer Freedom Fest.
It wasn't quite Summer Freedom Fest. It's going to be just want anybody is in the area. It's to go up there and meet like-minded people, sign some initiatives. They got John Carlson, Brandy Cruz, Brian Haywood, Raul Garcia, Dave Reichert, Semi Bird. Sounds like they're all going to be speaking. It's going to be tomorrow, the 29th, from 4:30 to 8:30 at Willowcrest Stables in Redmond, Washington. So anybody that's interested, coming out and seeing us, meeting us, we're going to have some information about what we're doing and how you can help out. Maybe we'll take some swag up there and you guys can get some swag from us. But that's the plan, to be there tomorrow.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it. It's always nice to get a working break from work.
Right.
But this is, to me, it's one of the most important parts of our mission. Is our podcast is so that we can't always make these Freedom Fest events or anything similar. Our podcast is to digitally interact with you. But, I'm always excited to go out and meet people who are appreciative of our work. I mean, again, those are those little prayers that keep us going, to see the smile and the gratitude. It's awesome. I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Me too. Awesome. Well, thanks, Pete. It was a good conversation. I hope what we said made any sense. I know we did a little bit of rambling and a little bit of off-topic conversation there, but I think it's important that we have these constitutional discussions, that we bring it up in conversation, and we bring it up with our family. I think we can. That's the one thing. It doesn't matter left or right. I think we can all agree on that those founding documents are integral to our nation continuing and our freedoms being protected. So with that, we'll sign off, and we'll see you next week. We're going to try and do this every week, the same time, 4 o'clock on Fridays. So be looking for it. It was a little bit late today, but around between the 4 and 5 o'clock hour, we should be here every Friday. And during the week, maybe we'll pop in for some updates. But that's the plan. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.